Thomas R. Gramins, Lieutenant Supply Corps, USS William R. Rush. It was not the first destroyer I had seen because I had, between junior and senior year, I was on a destroyer for my midshipman cruise. So yeah. I picked it up in Mayport, Florida. I can give you one humorous incident before we even left port. The regulations called for having a fireproof cabinet in which to keep your requisitions. And my office was on the O1 level of the ship. Well, the fireproof cabinet came, and it was so heavy that it caused the engineering officer to become furious with me because he had to recalculate the righting moment of the ship because the thing was so heavy in terms of which way it would roll. So that was not a good way to start. So, but you know, I had to do it. That's the regulation. You had to have that at that time. So yeah. So that was kind of an auspicious beginning, so to speak. But yeah, 3 days later, we left for the 6-month med deployment. So yeah. And I relieved as supply officer in Izmir, Turkey, on Easter Sunday that year. So, but relieving, I mean, the fellow that I relieved happened to be from the University of Wisconsin. So Bob Farley, and it was a very orderly relieving process, so that went fine. You knew what you were getting into because you also had the opportunity to read the inspection reports for the ship before you left for the ship. So you knew, basically what kind of a department it was, at least on paper. So probably the most memorable port would have been Nice, France, followed quickly by Barcelona. Well, I think Nice, you had a chance to see the French Riviera probably at its best, so to speak, and Monte Carlo, which was right there. So we got to see that. And my predecessor had a brother who was older than he, who had some addresses of some very nice young ladies in Nice, France. So, but that was fun. Barcelona was fun, because of the city itself, and it was just very interesting. Athens and Piraeus were interesting because I was a classical honors student in high school, so I got to see the actual, monuments, if you will. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, so it's fun. Yeah, but as a supply officer, you did not get a lot of time to go and see places because in port in the Med is your busiest time, whereas when I'm at sea, it's not as busy. But how shall I say it? My watch time quotes, because I did not stand watches, but I was the decrypt officer. So anytime a confidential or secret message came in, I would be awakened to break the message. So that was, my major responsibility at sea. So you had facilities, both, primarily Naples is where we went more often than not, because that was our stopping point. Barcelona, not so much so, or Nice, but Naples was probably the principal. And we had underway replenishments all the time, so that took care of most of our needs, because we were beholden to the carriers and the supply ships, because being the small boy, so you got your things from them, so that's fun. And highline it over to the carrier, and they would highline back what you might have requested, depending on which port you were going into, because you didn't have euros then, you had lira and drachma and pounds and you name it. So, and keeping track of that you didn't get stung by the exchange rates. You got to be mindful of what was going on there. So, if you were particularly buying for the store, for the ship store, you had approved vendors, but you were responsible for the merchandise selection. I mean, if you had slow-moving items, you didn't want to have that in your inventory. So it's like any other, retail operation, basically. You tried to pick the stuff that would sell, because the profits from the ship store went to support the ship's welfare and recreation fund. So, so you wanted to do well by that. So. For food, the interesting thing is the officers have their own wardroom mess, and you have a mess treasurer. I mean, they could buy stuff from the ship's supplies, but they could also buy stuff independently. So my responsibility there was more to provide the two cooks for the wardroom mess, but we had different wardroom mess treasurers which alternated among the line officers on the ship. So that was not something I had to worry about, other than if it was cooked poorly, which the two stewards knew not to let that happen. So it was, in that particular situation, our captain was insulated from me by the executive officer. It is probably one of my deepest regrets that as a department head, I was not given access to the commanding officer, because there were times when I had disagreements with the executive officer about how to do things. And that was probably, I think, one of my bigger disappointments for that particular time with that particular captain and that particular executive officer. I mean, I only had the one executive officer, I had two captains. So, but for the med crews, it was the one captain, the one exec. So, yeah. And the executive officer was under a lot of pressure from the captain. It was not a happy relationship, in all candor.